from amber and green list countries. Well, I'm joined now by Julia Bue-Said, who's the CEO of the Advantage Travel Partnership, a global leisure and business travel network. This is something that's been a bit of a sticking point. I've heard a lot of people complaining, both from within the industry and holidaymakers, about the costs of these tests. It's been a bit of a problem, hasn't it?
It has, David. Good evening. It has been a problem for some months now, and it's something that we've certainly across the industry been lobbying and talking to government about. The cost, but also the complexities around PCR testing has been a real hindrance to people thinking about travelling.
Now, you mentioned the cost. What sort of a cost are we talking about? Particularly if you've got a large family, presumably everyone's going to have a test. It's all going to add up, isn't it?
It all really does. I mean, whilst we have seen the price coming down, if you think about families travelling, it's going to cost you well over a few £100s just for your testing. So it adds a significant cost. And of course, it then depends now whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated. So it's still extortionate, regardless of how much the pricing has come down.
So this is something that's being welcomed in the industry?
I think it's, anything that ensures that consumers are protected and they are not, that they're not having to, pay for something which is extortionate is always welcome. However, I have to say I'm really struggling with this because this is something, as I said, that as an industry we've been lobbying government for months and months. We're right in the middle of the busiest time of year, historically. Even this year, it's a bit busier now than it has been. So right now, as it stands, families are having to pay these costs. They have no choice whatsoever. But it's not just about the cost. It's also the need for testing, the need for PCR testing. So obviously, if you're fully vaccinated, you're having to take PCR testing when you come back for your day 2 as a minimum from a green country. However, what we do know from all the data that we have is made available to us, it is public data. Those tests that the government insist upon, and they insist upon them because of the genomic sequencing that we've all got used to hearing about. This is where they go off and test for variants. Less than 5% of all PCR tests are actually sent off for genomic sequencing. So I have to say, in one breath, while the government are looking at the cost of testing, I think they also need to look at the necessity for testing and the need for testing, given they're not undertaking the genomic sequencing that the whole reason for taking PCR is based upon. I mean, aside from the genomic sequencing, looking at different variants, there is a belief that these are more accurate than the lateral flow test that you do at home with a little kind of a few drops on a little strip, aren't they? Yeah, although, pre-departure testing, they are the lateral flow, they call them antigen testing, they are the same. We're all allowed, and they're perfectly legal to take, and they're slightly less in cost, but still, they still, do obviously rank up for families. So, I think the whole point of PCR was about the genomic sequencing. That was the point the government stressed, that they were a necessity, but yet they are not genomic sequencing. The vast majority are not being sequenced. And actually, from data that we saw at the end of June, not one PCR test that was not one PCR test that came back positive from a green country. And also when you look at the amount of money that consumers have spent on this, we're estimating now that PCR testing only in the 12 weeks that travel has been legal has probably cost the British consumer around £50 million. So this is not small fry. This is extortionate, sums of money that travellers are having to pay.
And a fair amount if you've got a sizable family and you're thinking about taking a break. If I can ask you briefly, you talked about the green list countries then. There's been a change to travel restrictions come into force today. Some countries moved to the green list. A slight reduction in restrictions to France as well. Is presumably this is being welcomed?
It's welcomed. Anything that sees countries move into the green list is absolutely welcomed. Not forgetting that, we are still very restricted. Even when we're fully vaccinated, we're still very restricted in comparison to our counterparts in Europe and our competitors in Europe. But of course, it is welcomed. We welcome France being put back onto the normal amber list, away from its own special category. Arguably, should never have been in its own category in the first place. But it's we still need to see more countries move to the green list where there is a low risk of the virus. We really do welcome more countries being put on the green list as soon as possible.
Thank you very much for joining us. That's Julia Bue-Said, the CEO of Advantage Travel Partnership, here on LBC News, talking to us about the news that the Health Secretary has asked the competitions regulator to look into the costs of COVID PCR tests, which are required for travel to and from amber and green listed countries.